Sayın Cumhurbaşkanımızın saygıdeğer eşleri Sayın Emine Erdoğan hanımefendi salonumuza teşrif ediyor. Her Excellency Mrs. Emine Erdoğan has just arrived at our conference. Hoş geldiniz efendim. Distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our conference on the Syrian refugee crisis. Today, we will be honored to host Her Excellency Mrs. Emine Erdoğan, the First Lady of Turkey. Her Excellency will deliver the keynote address. We are very grateful for this opportunity to hear her perspective on the biggest humanitarian crisis of our time. As the SETA Foundation, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to her. I would also like to thank our panelists for agreeing to take part in this conference. I'm sure this will be an occasion we will hear different perspectives on the crisis and hopefully about the solutions. We will have an opportunity to enrich our understanding of this crisis, and we hope that this conference will contribute to a better appreciation of the humanitarian challenge at hand. Once again, thank you very much for being here, and I trust you will find Her Excellency's remarks and the panel discussions very useful and informative. I would also like to thank the SETA Foundation at Washington, D.C. staff and SETA Foundation in Turkey for organizing this conference. Before proceeding to the first panel, I just would like to mention that the panel title is Confronting the Syrian Refugee Challenge, and we will have Fuat Oktay, the president of AFAD, and Ghassan Hitto, president of the Syrian Forum, on stage. I would like to now invite the first panel to the stage. Thank you very much for coming.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Syrian Refugee Crisis panel, the first panel at SETA Foundation, and we are honored to have you here today, and we are honored to have distinguished guests, including Her Excellency Emine Erdoğan with us today, and we are looking forward to her keynote address. But before that, we have a panel on the general situation of the Syrian refugee crisis. It has been now 5 years that Syria has been at the center of international humanitarian crisis and the failure of international community. And since then, the failure to find a solution in Syria has been on the agenda. And we have two very distinguished guests today, two very distinguished panelists who have been in the field basically since the beginning of the crisis in Syria. We will have 20-25-minute panel time for both of our panelists. Then I will open the floor for question from you. The first speaker is Ghassan Hitto. Mr. Hitto was elected Prime Minister of the Syrian Transitional Government in March 2013 meeting of the National Coalition of the Syrian Revolutionary and Opposition Forces in Istanbul. And since then, he has been very active in the humanitarian dimension of the crisis as well. So we are looking forward to hear from him to give us a general framework about the situation in Syria and the Syrian refugee crisis right now.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for taking the time to participate in this discussion, not because we are speaking here on the panel, but because you're witnessing the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. So you're living history right now, and it's going to, historians will write about it as such, and therefore its importance. And I'm honored to be speaking in front of Her Excellency Mrs. Emine Erdoğan, and it's a great honor for us, First Lady of Turkey, to also take this time out of her very busy schedule, I believe, to be with us as well. And I'm grateful and honored to be with Dr. Fouad Aktay, who's a friend and also living this Syrian crisis, if you will, on a regular basis. Let me do some framing first, looking around the audience, although most of you probably are fully aware of what's happening in Syria. But let me say a few things that I believe it's important to when we talk about Syria, to put that in the correct context. One is, when we talk about Syria, we like to talk about it as an uprising, as a revolution, and as not a civil war. People of Syria rose against a dictator regime, Assad regime. Children of Daraa basically took the streets peacefully, looking to restore their dignity, their freedom, and looking for an opportunity to live their normal lives and build Syria. This is what the Syrian revolution was all about. Later, and I'm going to be talking about failures of the international community, and I hope not to appear too negative when I present my case. But later, because of the lack intervention by the international community, this revolution, we can easily say that it was forced, rather coerced, to somehow become militarized. In another word, the Syrians were left to fend for themselves. It's extremely important when we talk about Syria to put it in the correct context. Syrians started this revolution peacefully. Now, we move forward a little bit, and I'm going to summarize with a couple of numbers, and I know Dr. Fouad is going to give us a lot of statistics, because as a country that is really being taxed with the most of this Syrian refugee issue, there are 2.7 million refugees in Turkey right now, out of 4.8 million refugees worldwide, which means Turkey is having to pay the bill for over 50% of the refugee crisis. Now, when we talk about refugees, and especially in the political context, people sometimes forget that there are internally displaced persons inside Syria, which is another dimension for this crisis. And of those, there are 7.6 million internally displaced individuals inside Syria. Out of those, my friends, there are 2 million children inside Syria living in hard-to-reach areas. Half of the population of Syria, over half of the population of Syria, according to the United Nations, is a population in need. This is something was beyond our wildest imagination, to think that Syrians will reach a point where we will be described in the international community as a population in need. Now, speaking about refugees, unless the issue is handled correctly, the side effect and the outcome of a refugee crisis that is not managed and attended to correctly is going to affect not only Syrians, not only the region, but probably the world. When I talk about Syria and talk about Assad and talk about terrorism, the issues are intertwined. If we want to fix the issue of terrorism, you've got to go to the root cause. From our perspective, that root cause is the main factory that's producing terrorism, and that is the Assad regime. Without the Assad regime, make no mistake about it, there will be no Daesh. In order for us to be successful in our war against terrorism in Syria specifically, and against Daesh, to be more precise, the Assad regime must go. Otherwise, what we are doing is putting a Band-Aid that will hardly stick. When we talk about terrorism, we have to talk about the physics of opportunity. If we don't create opportunities to the Syrian people, there will be more refugees, and there will be more terrorism, and we will be pushing Syrians into a position of despair, a position of hopelessness. And this is something that will not produce positive results, not only in Syria, but anywhere in the world. What I believe, the slow action of the international community in terms of the political dimension allowed Russia and China to block several UN resolutions to simply condemn the Assad regime, simply to even attempt to forward the case to the International Criminal Courts for those who are responsible for committing war crimes. Now, mind you, as a person, you would say, what do we have against Assad? We don't. As a person who is Syrian, Syrians have lived hundreds and thousands of years together, whether they were Muslims, Sunnis, Alawis, Shia, Kurds, Turkmenis, etc. This is a proven fact. Syria is a true melting pot. But when you have one individual, one family, that made it its business to kill its own citizens, torture its own citizens, detain its own citizens, kidnap its own citizens, then this family, and at the head of it today is Bashar al-Assad, must be held accountable. So when we talk about an opposition that is not agreeing to create what they call today a unity government or a national government, it's not like we're opposed to the concept, but how could we sit in the same table with a person that has caused the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II? It's amazing that the Assad regime, and at the helm of it is Bashar al-Assad, is able to escape all these crimes. There are 500,000 people, my friends, 500,000 people between killed, maimed, and missing in Syria. When the Assad regime drops a barrel bomb, at least 50 to 100 people are killed. The entire building, when it hits a building, the entire building collapses. They advanced that approach. Now they carry dumpsters with explosives. And then when they drop this from the air, an entire neighborhood is wiped out. Now let me tell you this. The only entity that owns the air in Syria is the Assad regime. So going with the discussion that, well, the opposition could be committing some of these things, possible, and we are 100% for holding accountable everyone who commits a crime. But the barrels and the ballistic missiles are being dropped by the Assad's fighter jets. Later on by Russia recently. According to the United States statistics, the best statistics that I believe the United States have issued, that starting with the Russian strikes about less than 6 months ago, 70% of those that they have bombed were civilian areas and moderate opposition areas, not Daesh. Your Excellency, at the beginning of the Russian strikes, only 5% of what they hit were Daesh. And once again, this regime is escaping the crime of history. The only way, when we look at the solution for Syria, the only way that we can hope to find peace in Syria, we have to rid Syria of the person who is the peace spoiler, and that is Bashar al-Assad. As long as Bashar al-Assad is there, we will be fooling ourselves to dream that there will be peace in Syria. It is not to his advantage. The only language that he knows is to rule Syria with an iron fist. The only language that he knows, because he learned it from his father. And the crimes of the 80s at the hands of Hafez al-Assad are still fresh in our memories. Bashar al-Assad just came to remind us that this is indoctrinated in this family practice and their understanding of how they want to rule Syria. I'll get back to the refugees. I was asked to give you at least a political context of this, and it's important to understand it, just because to understand why are all of these Syrians trying to leave Syria. Not because They simply love to answer the request or the tease by country X in Europe or country Y in Europe, and I say how generously they will accept refugees, to find out, after the few tens of thousands, we had ourselves a political crisis worldwide. Let me recognize the state of Turkey for their generosity, for their hospitality, and for all what they have done for the Syrian refugees. Again, Dr. Fuad is going to speak about what they have done for Syrians. 2.7 million refugees. It put a lot of tax on the country. It burdens the country. These people, at a minimum, they require health, they require education, and some of them will require shelter. And that does not come at a cheap price. The international community, at best, has participated with 50% on the humanitarian crisis, while the rest were left for countries like Turkey or for the Syrians themselves. This is important. We cannot be confused or afford to be confused when we talk about Syria. You cannot be confused and naive and say, well, these people are fighting each other. That is not the case. The fact of the matter is, Syrian people have risen against Assad, and he responded with bullets, with tanks. So we had the first wave of refugees. And then second, he couldn't do it by himself, so Iran came in with 18 militias that are backed by Iran. On top of them is Hezbollah. They committed their own crimes and atrocities in Syria and against Syrian people, civilian Syrian people. And there you have another second wave of refugees. And then after that, the siege of cities have started, encouraging people to leave those cities. They don't want to call it ethnic cleansing or Syrian cleansing, but the fact of the matter, there are at least 18 towns, cities that are under siege. Most famous one that you probably have heard of is Daraya, is Muaddamiya, and Zabadani and Reef Damascus, and other areas, those that have made it to the news. Keep in mind there are 15 more of these towns that are under siege. So when you have towns that are under siege, it also encourages more people to flee the country. And then comes the Russians. And I skipped the chemical attacks, by the way, because we talked about Assad's crimes, right? We somehow became colorblind when it came to the chemical attacks, unfortunately. And then came the Russians, and also our Turkish friends will testify to the tens of thousands of refugees that have been caused by Russian airstrikes on civilian areas or on areas that are held by moderate opposition groups. And last but not least is also the cooperation of the Kurdish militias in the north, namely by the PYD and YPG. While I don't have the statistics, but it has been established that these forces, in coordination with the Assad regime, have also caused civilians to feel unsafe and also seek refuge in Turkey or in other countries. It is very important to understand the root cause of refugees. Now, we believe, and I'll conclude with this, because if you keep me going, then you have to give me a signal of sort. When I look at refugee situations specifically, I think we have to do a few things. One, we have to stay persistent on trying to advocate, encourage the establishment of a no-fly zone, a safe zone, whatever zone you want to call it. Because, my friends, such a zone will reduce, I'm not going to say prevent, will reduce significantly the influx of refugees to other countries. Second, we've got to look at the countries, the host countries that are hosting refugees. At the top of them in Turkey, 2.7 million. Lebanon, a little bit over 1 million. I think Jordan, a little bit over 600,000. Iraq and northern Iraq and Kurdistan, about 200-some thousand. And maybe there's less than 100,000 in Egypt. And if you work the math, you will get the 4.8 million. These countries do require assistance. And I do respect and honor what the Turkish government have said in the first few years. But by God, if I were in their shoes, I mean, how could you handle such a thing by yourself? It is simply difficult. Let alone the stress that with such a refugee population put on the society itself. It also stresses the political system and also stresses the economical system, and all of these things do require a lot of resources, significant resources that are beyond what gets raised, I think, at the UN or other countries. I am definitely hinting to the fact that funds that are being allocated at the international community to address the refugee crisis is not even close to being sufficient. Second, so I've talked about the importance of a no-fly zones or a safe zone. I talked about the importance of supporting countries. And on the humanitarian side, and this is something that we focus on, I believe that there is a lot of funds available at the international community to deliver a food basket, to deliver a blanket, to deliver a health kit of sort, and what have you. There is not enough money, and I would say, and I don't want to exaggerate, barely right now, we're talking about livelihood projects. We've got to figure out a way to empower refugees economically. Not only help the host countries, but also put these people in jobs, get them educated. And let me go back to a phrase that I mentioned in the middle of my speech, the physics of opportunity. If we don't want refugees to continue to leave Syria, if we don't want to create a case of hopelessness and disparity, we've got to create opportunities for these refugees. People, my friends, are driven by their needs. If we address some of these needs, then there is no reason for them to escape, there is no reason for them to flee, and there is no reason for them to become radicalized. I'm sorry that I took long that I thought, but thank you very much for listening. And thank you for being concerned about Syria. Your Excellency, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this general political framework and potential solutions for the Syrian crisis. Now we have another very important panelist that has been in the field since the beginning of the crisis. Fuat Oktay is the president of Turkish Disaster and Emergency Management Authority. Both of our panelists have really long resumes, so in order to save time, I'm just skipping the rest of it. While he's making his remarks, probably you will meet him more.
Thank you, Dr. Kanat. Her Majesty, distinguished guests, my dear friend, Ghassan Hitto, it's an honor for me. It's a very high pleasure for me to join you here in Washington, D.C. today. And I'd like to take this opportunity indeed to extend my gratitude and appreciation to the SETA Foundation and their kind invitation. Again, before I begin, I'd like to take this opportunity just to acknowledge the invaluable contribution that President Erdoğan and First Lady Emine Erdoğan have made to humanitarian relief efforts since 2011 by repeatedly meeting with community leaders, government officials, and world leaders to raise awareness about the strategy unfolding to Syria. Mr. Hitto indeed has drawn a wonderful framework regarding what's been going on in Syria. Let me just try to fill that frame to give you maybe a brief picture what's going on in Turkey. Just before the war, as you have just mentioned, indeed, the accepted number of population in Syria was nearly 21 million. Out of this 21 million, right now, the total number of people who have needed some type of humanitarian aid is 13.5 million. Out of this 13.5 million, nearly 1,200 million have left their homes. You have mentioned about 7.8 million as IDPs, but even the numbers that the UN have already basically made it public is even a lot higher than that. The number of people who have left Syria is 4.8 million, and the number of people that have influx to Turkey, the Syrian refugees, are more than 2.7 million. As of today, indeed, the number of, again, biometrically registered refugees in Turkey is 2,750,000. Just adding maybe a little bit more than non-registered ones, and the Iraqis on top of it, it's even more than 3 million as of today, indeed. The situation, the crisis is over its fifth year, indeed. We are into the sixth year. From the day one, basically, our president has declared an open door policy in Turkey. We have opened our doors to those who have needed humanitarian aid. And in its sixth year, the policy is still in there. Our doors are still open, with a more security issues have come to basically forward. It was 2011, April 2011, indeed, when we had nearly 250,000 Syrians coming into Turkey towards Hatay region. It's a basically border city, Turkish city to Syria. However, the numbers have started increasing based upon the conflict level that was going on in Syria, indeed. We did start hosting them through our camps in Turkey, especially in Hatay. The first one, second camp, third one, fourth one, and fifth one, we realized that the conflict was going to continue. So the numbers have really raised in Hatay to a level that a single city will not be able to handle it anymore. So we did basically move it to another city, again, just near the border, Kilis. Then we did realize that the situation is going to continue, so we did take our lessons learned into account, and the lessons learned throughout the entire world, including UN, and basically, even we did have that approach from day zero, but day one, but we did take a different stand a humanitarian stand towards the refugees indeed. Those who have come to Turkey looking for a safety, a safe place to live, and maybe a shelter and a food, but we did try to provide a lot more than that. We did have those people who have lost their hopes, not only elderly, but even the kids. So we did basically decide to provide a system, a basically city system rather than a camp indeed, in Kilis. We said, okay, let's provide shelter and also provide food, but let's provide a lot more than that. Let's provide education to those kids who will need to come back to their own, who will be able to stand alone and have basically gain some hope for their own future and also for their families' future. We did realize that we did have to provide healthcare services to them as well. So indeed what we did frame a system, a city, that's why we called it a container city rather than a camp indeed. Either container city or a tent city, just to give an idea, a feeling to those refugees that this is not a camp for them. This is a home environment that they can find anything that they might in their home. We did realize that no matter what we call it, it's a camp. However, we did try our best to provide more. As of today, indeed, we do have 26 of those container cities or tent cities. Yes, we provide food and shelter, but almost every single kid in those container cities or tent cities attends school. Nearly 80,000 kids attend schools in those camps. Just, I might use camp from time to time just to have a better understanding of what I am talking about maybe. We did provide healthcare, free of charge healthcare to all, and also we did provide, we did let them establish some type of NGOs among themselves, like among women, elderly, and youth indeed. Just, we did let them to basically form their own organization, elect their own representatives, so that those elected representatives can basically get back and prepare certain agendas, contents for them, including training and others indeed. Like the one, the platform that they established, and we did help them to establish as a woman platform in Gaziantep, Nizip. Nearly more than 200 women indeed got together, determined their own problems, and tried to find solutions to their own problems. Basically, the problems like violence against women and early marriages, etc. And we did try our best to provide them to resolve their issues indeed. And also we did set up a camp management system through which the community will be able to elect their own representatives, and those elected representatives were able to and are able to basically participate in the camp management. So through those cities, basically, what we did try was not to just provide the needs that they might have, but we did try to let them taste the democracy, the way that they can speak up on their own, indeed. Yes, the conditions were and are a lot better than anywhere around the world. The conditions of those refugees, in-camp refugees, basically. We almost provide everything that they might need. However, the number of refugees that they exist in Turkey stay outside of the camps. Just nearly 300,000 live in those camps, in 26 of those camps. We have more than 2.3 million refugees who are living outside of the camps, mostly in the nearby cities to Syria, and also in metropolitan cities like Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir. Of course, we do try our best to provide them whatever they might need for the non-camp refugees as well. We do provide healthcare services for them, free of charge. As a Turkish citizen, if I go to any hospital, I will have certain provisions to get the health services, and I will have to pay certain amount to get those services. But if you are a Syrian refugee, if you go to any hospital in Turkey, given that you have biometrically registered, you'll have a free of charge services. As of today, the number of health services that we have provided have exceeded nearly 13 million outpatient clinic services. The number of inpatient, in-hospitalized care we have provided have exceeded 500,000, and the operations, surgical operations that we have provided have exceeded 350,000. So if you just look at the statistics, they are just statistics. But if you look at it from the local community's perspectives, that's a bottleneck for their own healthcare services that they will get when they get sick or when their loved ones get sick. No matter what the conditions were for the local communities, till today, we have not heard a single complaint from them regarding how come we do provide healthcare services for the Syrians. How come we basically let them share their healthcare supplies in those areas indeed. It shows the generosity of the Turkish citizens indeed in Turkey. But of course it also shows a cost, again a bottleneck for the local communities. When it comes to the education, yes, we do provide nearly 8,000 educational services for those kids in the camps. However, 30%, at least 30%, it's 30 to 35% indeed, of the entire population, entire refugee population, are school-age kids, which makes it more than 900,000 school-age kids indeed, just in Turkey. With the non-camp school-age kids, the number of kids that have access to schooling is around 330,000 as of today. If you look at that figure from one perspective, it's a huge number. It's a lot more than maybe many of the countries in Europe or anywhere in the world indeed who have been hosting Syrians. But if you look at it from the general perspective, it's even less than 50% who gets education. We do provide educational services through our state schools, and especially NGOs have involved into providing educational care, and our Ministry of Education have totally involved in providing those educational services, and also try to provide accreditation system and control to make sure that the standards in those schools are high. But again, the target has to be the last kid that's going to be out there who's not going to be able to reach or access to schooling. We should not stop till that we reach that last target indeed. Our goal is to reach 450,000 by the end of the year. We'll be having 450,000 kids attending school. And our main goal is to reach every single school-age kid by the end of 2017. It's extremely hard for a single country to meet this challenge indeed. We know it's a huge challenge, but a challenge that has to be met. This challenge can be met only through international burden sharing indeed. We have outcried throughout the entire world that yes, Turkey has opened its doors. Turkey is trying its best to provide whatever is needed for those refugees. We do have 911 kilometers of border with Syria. We do have a very strong historical ties with Syrian people. Even if we don't have historical ties, it's almost impossible to turn your back to those people who are in need. At least that's not us in Turkey. We did call them guests at the beginning. The reason we did call them guests was on purpose indeed. The guest in Turkey means that even if you don't have anything to eat, you make sure that you basically feed, you provide it to your guest first. Whatever is left, you provide it to your own family. So it's, thank you. So we did call them guests. Even if you don't have any place to stay, again, we make sure that our guests will have a nice place to stay, then we look after ourselves. Basically, this was a message to our own employees who were working in those camps, and it was a message to the entire society indeed. Those Syrians coming to Turkish side was our guests. It was not just a basically status. It was just a traditional message indeed that we wanted to provide to the community. The message was well taken. And as of today, almost every single one of those 2.7 million Syrians live in Turkey. Some of them have tried to flee to Europe. You all have seen those basically news maybe. They thought that when they leave to Europe, they'll find a lot better situation indeed. They'll get housing, they'll get their kids having access to schooling. They thought they'll get certain monthly salaries, because this was somehow the perception that was given to them. Not only the ones in Turkey, but the ones outside of Turkey as well, including inside the Turkey. But when they left to the European countries, they realized that that was not the case indeed. The message that was well taken in Turkey and the guest perception was not the same perception when they went to Europe indeed. Again, as Turkey, we did try our best, even to help them as well. We did try to provide humanitarian aid to the other side of Syria as well. We did try to promote them to stay where they are in their own country, because no matter how much you provide, it's always your own country indeed. If you have anything to basically to live, you'll prefer to stay in your country. As Mr. Hitto mentioned, Syrians don't want to leave Syria just because they would like to come to Turkey or Jordan or another country or European countries or US, because they don't have a place to live. There's a political turmoil over there. There is no hope for them. They are not able to see the end of the tunnel. Even they are not able to see the beginning of the tunnel. So we know, and they realize, that the main solution stays at the political side. No matter what we provide, the main solution, the root cause, is to find a political solution in Syria so that they can get back to their own countries. They don't want to come to Turkey, or they don't want to come to US or any other countries indeed. But they are not a burden on the entire world either. They are not the ones who have created that problem in Syria. They are not the ones who have killed more than 300,000 people in Syria. They are the ones who have been suffering. So as the humanity indeed, we should help them to suffer less rather than seeing them as a burden on the entire world's basically shoulders. We have provided more than 25,000 trucks of humanitarian aid to the other side of the border. And we have provided humanitarian aid to the Iraqi side as well indeed. We did provide, even we did establish camps in Iraqi side for the Yazidis, for the Turkoman, for Arabs, and for Kurds as well. When the Kurdish people at the Syrian side, remember the Kobani issue, have difficulties over there. Turkey was the only country who have opened its doors. I was personally there for 15 days. Forget about being the head of AFAD indeed. I was there personally, as a person indeed. We have received every single civilian at Kobani side, from the Kobani side. We did provide shelter, we did provide food, we did provide health services. our president, our prime minister, the entire country, officials indeed, we were under so much pressure in terms of providing the best for them. We did receive more than 200,000 people within 3 days. Receiving 200,000 refugees within 3 days is not an easy task to do, to accomplish. It's not just the statistics. But we did basically, the perception that was created right after that was as if Turkey has not helped the Kurdish people at the other side of the border. Indeed, Turkey was the only country, I mean the only country, who has helped those people over there. Because we did not differentiate. We have not differentiated based upon ethnicity, religion, or geography, whatever it is. Yes, we did provide help to our best ability, to Kurdish when they needed it, to Yazidis when they needed it, to Arabs when they needed it, and to Turkoman when they needed it, and to even Armenians who lived in Syria when they needed it, and Christians when they needed it. And we did establish camps in Turkey for Christians as well, and for Yazidis as well right now indeed. But the perception somehow was created differently. Again, Turkey is trying its best to provide as much as possible. Of course, it has a cost associated with it. Within the United States, United Nations standards, indeed, it's right now more than $10 billion, the cost of that we have spent so far for the Syrian refugees. But this figure is mainly for those in-camp refugees and the healthcare for all. When we include the non-camp refugees, the nearly 8 million refugees in Turkey, the cost will definitely not only double, but will be tripled indeed. We did again outcry to the entire world that this was not just Turkey's problem. This was the entire world's problem, and Turkey was trying to do its best. We were trying our best on behalf of UN, on behalf of EU, on behalf of US as well. I did attend one of the conference calls about 2 months back, I guess. Again, it was through SETA. I was asked a question then through one of our US friends over here, indeed, that she was claiming that US was trying its best to provide humanitarian aid and to trying to find a political solution in Syria. The answer I gave then, I remember, that day was the day that Russia was bombarding. Russia got involved into the situation and bombarding heavily into the moderate opposition indeed, mainly the Turkmen and Arabs. Russia came into the picture claiming that they were going to fight against Daesh. You again mentioned 70%, but it was a lot more than 90%, that they fought against the moderate opposition. They did not have anything to do with the Daesh, and we did not see any concentration on fighting against Daesh in the region either. Turkey paid the biggest price, caused through Daesh, caused through Assad, caused through YPG. But at the same time, Turkey the perception was, again, as if Turkey had something to do in the region. There is a reality and there is a perception. Reality is totally different than perception, but unfortunately, perception becomes more reality than even the reality itself.
We have to change it.
We have to change it. Maybe the main message that I would like to provide to this distinguished audience today is to help us to change that perception. United States was not, since I am in Washington right now, it's better to talk frankly, right? To give the message directly indeed. When Russia was bombarding the entire area, US was not there. When those people were suffering over there, US was not there. those people, those Syrians over there, were expecting US to take a better role to help them in the region indeed. Unfortunately, US was not there. It might be seen from this part of the world that you might be over there, all over there maybe, but the reality, US was not there. You might have a reason, I don't know. I am not the person to get into those because I am not a politician and I am not a diplomat either. I am just talking as a head of a FAD. I am just looking at it from the humanitarian perspective. When the players who are supposed to be in the field are not there, it's the human being who pays the price. No matter what the real situation, whatever the political situation is. We look at it, I look at it from the humanitarian perspective. People are suffering over there. Basically, there are others trying to have different political intentions over there. Human being is not statistics to play with. There is basically, when you visit those container camps or tent cities basically, you'll find a different story underneath every single container or tent. Those are the real people. There are kids out there who have lost their families. There are kids out there who are not able to basically attend schools. Unless we reach every single one of those kids, they are going to be a risk not only for Turkey, but for the entire world indeed. We did try our best, basically. We did, again, try our best to provide the message to the UN, to US, to EU, telling them that a safe zone at the Syrian side, a no-fly zone, would help the Syrian refugees themselves to stay in their own countries and help the rest of the world, including EU, basically having a more refugee influx. We were not able to get our message through. Everybody thought that there was a political intention behind it. That message, basically, that we tried to provide was totally humanitarian. It was totally humanitarian message then. It was a humanitarian plan then. It is a humanitarian message and humanitarian plan as of today as well. We know that it's almost impossible to get a UN resolution regarding no-fly zone, but there are people at the Syrian side who are trying to get help. So what we have tried recently, what we have done recently is try to establish camps at the Syrian side. We have established 10 cities near Kilis, again a nearby city in Turkey. More than 110,000 people live over there. We have established 2 other camps near Hatay, another nearby city. More than 100,000 people live in those camps as well. Nearly Germany has shown interest to provide humanitarian aid to the other side of the border with Turkey as well. Netherlands has shown some interest, but we have not basically started providing it concretely. We have been talking with EU throughout the last couple of months. We have been talking about EU's involvement, providing more and more humanitarian, taking more humanitarian responsibility basically through the Syrian solution. But as of today, we have not received a single penny from anywhere. The $10 million that we have spent so far, the international contribution throughout the entire 5 years is nearly $460 million. It's almost none. Again, I just don't want to take more of your time, but the message I would like to provide is, yes, it's the main solution is the political solution. The awareness has to be there all the time. Yes, as Turkey, we are trying our best to provide as best as we can, but like any other single country, Turkey has a capacity and capability to handle a certain numbers indeed, and it's not a it might not be appropriate for all Syrians living Syria either. So the international community has to take its own burden sharing over there, and we have to keep awareness always at the top. Again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity that you have provided to us in this time.
Thank you very much. And before opening the floor for question, I will have a few questions for the panelists. It has been 3 years now that SETA Foundation, my colleagues at the SETA Foundation, we go to the region, Turkey-Syria border. We visited all of the cities along the border. And different units, different branches within the SETA is trying to understand, explain, and at the same time offer policy solutions for the Turkish government and for the international community about the refugee crisis. And each and every time or my colleagues go to one of these camps, we usually see a very frustrated and disappointed group of people, the Syrian refugees. They are very disappointed by the failure of international community. They are disappointed by the lack of action from the Western government. And when we visited last week actually, we were in the region, we see the disappointment from the European Union as well, and of course the United States. So my brief question is, of course I have tons of questions for these two distinguished guests. What would be your response for these people when you meet them, when they express their frustration, their disappointment about the international community? I'm pretty sure that you will not be that grim. How do you explain the situation for them?
Very good question. I'll give you what I usually respond to my fellow Syrians when I'm faced with this question. Those who will fix the Syrian problem, the Syrian crisis, whether we continue to look at the international community or not, it has to be the Syrian people themselves. For that reason, at the Syrian Forum, this is the organization that I serve as its CEO, we talk about three things. We talk about building the capacity of a Syrian individual, building the capacity of the Syrian individual, building the capacity of Syrian civil society organization, and building the capacity of local administration. We believe if we work from the ground up, over the long term, Syrians will be able. They are not able to do so today effectively. But over the long term, if we continue on this path, building the capacity of Syrians, then they will participate effectively in finding a solution to the crisis. As it is right now, unless, as I mentioned in my talk, unless the political solution is reached and root causes are identified and Syria is rid of those root causes, i.e. the Assad specifically, we're going to be in turmoil for a long, long time. And I think the international community is practically fooling itself unless they get rid of Assad.
Thank you. You want to add something?
Well,
maybe in the context of the Turkey-EU negotiations, and you can illuminate this a little bit more.
When we visit the field, indeed, we don't see frustration against us, but we do see and hear frustration against, especially the UN.
I agree with that, yes.
And Europe and the international community. There's not much answer to provide, indeed. Basically, we bring the international community to the camps and to meet with them as well, and they even themselves don't have real answers to provide. The real answer to that frustration is, of course, to give even little hope that they're going to have a solution back in their own country, in Syria. We are not able to provide that answer to them. With the EU talks recently going on between Turkey and the EU, it's nothing that would basically, that will be a solution or response to their frustration. Their frustration has something to do with their own country and with their own family's future. Unless we find answers to those, no other talks will ease their frustration.
Thank you very much. And we can open the floor for questions. And let's start with Ravzan. Mic. Can we get the mic over?
Thank you. Thank you to both of the speakers. I'm Ravza Kavakçıkan, member of Turkish Grand National Assembly. It's nice to be back in SETA. I feel back home. I don't know if there's a good answer to my question, but listening to the both of you, I was thinking about the Arab Spring. If the international community made a decision and if we got rid of Assad, do you think, could we be hopeful that we will not face the same situation in Egypt and similar situation to the other countries that are still struggling with their democracies? I want to hear your opinion. Thank you.
Would you like me to? Ms. Rauda, it's good to see you. I tried to see you in Ankara on my last visit, but we missed each other. So, but I did see your father, alhamdulillah, and I was so happy to see him. A very good question. Do we want to end up with a situation like Egypt? No. I mean, we've seen that movie before. We're living it right now. Why would you want to replace a situation with potential situation that's worse than what it is right now? So I don't want to get into any type of conspiracy, right? But it's clear to me there is a lack of willingness to find a reasonable solution for these type of issues that we have seen in countries that experienced the Arab Spring. It's amazing to me when we talk about countries like the United States. You know, I've lived in the United States. I'm a citizen of the United States, and I've lived here for 30 years. And when I left Syria, we came to the United States for the value that this country stands for. And you look at Europe, and you look at countries that talks about human rights and talks about democracy. I attended a conference in Syracuse a while back about human rights. And I made the question, and I thought maybe I'll tease the audience. And the audience were a very distinguished audience, 100 people select by invite. And I said, it looks to me that when the West talks about human rights, they talks about human rights for the Western citizen. So is democracy something that the countries of the Arab Spring, do they deserve it? That's the question. If they do, and if we are convinced that this idea of democracy, that this is something that everybody should have the right to participate, or as my dear friend Dr. Fuad said, taste it. This is why we like to work on local administration, give people a taste of democracy. Why not help them achieve it? But my friend, is it really, really logical, or we just like to continue to fool ourselves? Is it just remote possibility that a person like Assad, who has been indoctrinated by his father, an entire system, and even if you look at the doctrine of the Ba'ath Party, it's such an elitist doctrine, such that it believes that only those in the elite in the Ba'ath parties can think and can make decisions on behalf of the entire population. So the question is, my dear friend Rawda, is do really these countries that are trying to find a solution believe that we are worthy of practicing the democracy? Sometimes I'm starting to have doubts. So again, I take solace with the conviction that I have reached. Only us, only Syrians and countries like us, we will be able, through a continuous struggle, to show and demonstrate that yes, and indeed, we are worthy of this. Let me give you an example, and I will conclude with this. Syrians have demonstrated in the last 5 years. Listen to this. See, everybody likes to tell you of this binary solution, either Daesh or Assad, either terrorist or Assad. But they don't tell you about the third and the fourth and the fifth option. And they exist today. An example in Aleppo. Aleppo, my dear friend, 4 times right now, the local administration have completed election. Right, Dr. Ahmed? 4 times. This is something to be celebrated. Did anybody hear of this in the news anywhere? This is real, my friend. And I'll give you statistics. And I know our dear brothers in Turkey, they know this well. These people were able to write proposals. They were able to receive aid, provide electricity, educations, and what have you. And what we do? We simply let Daesh come in, and we don't stop it. Even with Daesh, they continue to survive. Idlib, at least 2 times local administration. Dar'a, excellent examples, 3 times administration, an excellent example of coordination between local administration, civil society organization, and also FSA. And the examples go on and on. But look, as if there is a systematic way of blocking this from coming up to the surface. There are solutions, my friend. There is hope in Syria. We just have to give it an opportunity. But to simply focus on Al-Qaeda, focus on Daesh, focus on what Payday is doing, and then what happens to all of the positive things that are taking place? We have to enable these people by simply encouraging them with words, putting the spotlight on them. I bet you we will energize them more.
Thank you. Do you want to add something? Okay. Wait for the mic. Leslie, mic.
Thank you. I'm with the Assembly of Turkish American Associations. In the refugee issue, there is a tremendous public relations problem. I follow 3 major papers in the television news. There is never a word about what Turkey is doing. It is outrageous. There is almost a deliberate suppression of the news. I don't know, I'm sure the SETA and many people who live in Washington or in the United States, never a word. In fact, there was a map which showed in circles the number of refugees in every country, in the Wall Street Journal once. And later in the afternoon, the map was erased. There is a deliberate suppression of news about Turkey's refugee issue. I think you should get the foreign journalists there. I think you should do documentaries. You should constantly do work on the PR issue. You know, many countries in the West, they do perhaps 50% good, 50% is the PR. And in Turkey, I think we do 95% good and almost no PR. So this is so critical.
Exactly. I like
Well, it was a comment more than a question, but Fuat Bey, I think, have very many things to say about this problem.
Little correction
Yes.
indeed. Not 95%. It's 100% work and 0% PR. it's maybe just one thing that I'd like to raise indeed. That's one of the reasons maybe we are here. Rather than you Let us do the work. We are very good in doing the work, but we are just terrible when it comes to PR. So let's basically create we rather than you. Why don't we basically provide platforms to get this message through, whether it's basically writing scenarios or creating movies or documentaries, whatever it is. So since you are part of an association, it has to be we rather than just us. So it's all of our responsibility. But the message is well taken. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. You want to add a very quick comment on this, or?
I agree that we all should participate in putting or directing the spotlight on where good is being done. And I believe that Turkey has been dealt with in the media unfairly. Even today, as I was prepared for this session, I just wanted to see what has been said about Turkey. I mean, in one article, they had the audacity just to simply frame the entire refugee crisis in the context of Europe. And I would say that's just insulting. Where you have Turkey having this, the bulk of refugees, my friends, are in Turkey. When we talk about refugees and refugee crisis, if Turkey is not present on the table and Turkey is not putting its 2 cents in that discussion is invalid. It does not make any sense. You don't make decision on a corporation when the majority stakeholder is not present. And they have the majority stake in this game and they have to be present. When people talk about refugees and they don't mention Turkey, I'm sorry myself, I take that nothing but with ill intention. So we have to do more work ourselves. As Syrians, we have a very high stake in this, and we share, as my friend Dr. Fuad said, 990 plus kilometers with Turkey. The stability and the well-being of Turkey is critically important to us, and therefore we Syrians have to do this. I don't apologize for taking this strong stance to support Turkey. Frankly, it's for selfish reasons. It is what we have to live with for a long, long time. Unless somebody takes Syria from where it is right now and put it somewhere else in the world, we're going to continue to be neighbors. So the well-being of Turkey is extremely important, and I do believe Turkey right now is not getting its fair share in the media for the excellent work that they are doing.
Just maybe one more,
Sure.
if you
sure,
let me,
sure,
just one more statistics indeed. Turkey right now is the country which hosts the highest number of refugees, not only Syrians, in the entire world. Turkey is, based upon the UN reports, Turkey is the country who has spent, which is the third largest donor country in the world. When it if you compare it with the GNP, it's the country which spends the most in the entire world. So we have to maybe get this message through as well.
Thank you. We will have one last question, and then we are short in time, so yeah, go. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this great panel. I have 2 questions. One would be to Mr. Oktay. Turkey has been very much criticized in international media for its open door policy. In fact, accused of kind of like insinuated that Turkey supported ISIS through that policy. My question is, what would happen if Turkey did not open its borders? What would be the humanitarian cost? What would be the result of that policy? And my second question is to Mr. Hitto. Thank you for providing the real picture, what is going on in Syria. The Syrian crisis is the best documented civil war in human history. We know what happened. We watched it. We watched people being butchered. We watched people being gassed. But still, I mean, this narrative about Syria is very much, as you pointed out, is very much spinned. Do you think the next American president will adopt a different strategy to Syria, which actually fits into the basic facts on the ground? Thank you.
2 big questions, but we have 1 minute each for the speakers. Go ahead.
Well, the open door policy, it's, I've mentioned again indeed regarding the Daesh issue. Turkey is the one who pays the price the most. We do have an open door policy since day one. The only reason we take huge security measurements recently is just because of the terrorist organization, including Daesh indeed, and YPG as well. The open door policy, indeed, it's Daesh and YPG who suffers from it. It's not that they benefit from it. So open door policy is for the Syrian refugees indeed. And the security measures are for the terrorist organizations like Daesh and the YPG. So Turkey tries its best, and you have realized, you have seen it from the news media as well, the basically bombing that occurred in Brussels as well. Turkey has indeed caught the terrorist itself, and Turkey was the one who has basically outcried to the entire world and those countries as well. These guys are and were the terrorists, but was not taken into serious consideration indeed. Turkey does its best to prevent the terrorists going through our borders indeed. It's indeed the other countries who are having problems in sharing intelligence, maybe, with Turkey. And it's other countries who are not able to take their own security measures to prevent them leaving their own countries to go to Syria or any other country indeed. So nobody can blame Turkey for their own shortcomings indeed. Turkey tries and does its best to prevent it. Thank you.
Sir Hitto, 45 seconds now.
45 seconds. Okay, I'll divide in 15 and 30. So again, if you want to look at Daesh, and I think the question is smart, and I'm going to piggyback on what Dr. Fouad has said. You have to look at where do these Daesh people come from, and then the entire perspective changes. And to help you with that, just to give you the beginning of the thread, just go back at the Assad regime and how he worked against the Americans in Iraq. That was the start of that factory of Daesh. Go back, look at what happened, and know that Daesh did not come into Syria through the Turkish border. Daesh was basically either in Syria or in Iraq, and they brought it from other countries because they had the database of those people who actually fought against the Americans in Iraq. And George Bush's threats to Assad was historically known to all of us to stop undermining the work of Americans in Iraq. So they cannot fool us and all of a sudden says that this is something that's coming from somewhere else. Basically, their little child, Assad, is not getting enough slaps on the hand, and he continues playing with the toys that he's not supposed to be playing with. As far as the United States, will they have a different policy? Look, let me summarize it with this. As a leader of the free world, and America today is the superpower, that with it carries a responsibility, a moral responsibility. If they don't come to the aid of those people who are suffering, then I'm sorry. I don't think this administration or the one after that will do America good. The reputation of America is at stake. There is something beyond superpower, something beyond military power. There is morality here at stake. And the principles upon which this country was founded now are being challenged. We are not supporting true seeking democracy people. We are seeing people slaughtered. This administration will go in history. That's under its watch. 500,000 Syrian citizens between killed, missing, and maimed happened in front of them. Yes, they provided aid. Yes, they supported the opposition. Yes, they helped, no doubt in our mind, but not enough, and nothing that is suitable for a superpower like the United States of America and the European countries.
I want to one more time thank for the panelists and thank you for being here today. SETA Foundation had been working on refugee crisis for the last 3 years, and if you go to the region more than twice, you started to have a split personality of trying to provide an objective analysis of the situation and at the same time trying to raise the awareness about the Syrian refugee crisis. So this week it was Nuclear Security Summit in Washington, D.C. SETA decided to be an outlier here and try to raise awareness about a more serious situation right now, that people are actually dying, people are actually being killed, and people are suffering. So we want to thank again for Her Excellency Emine Erdoğan. She had a very busy schedule, but she allocated time for us, and Her Excellency Minister Sema Ramazanoğlu for being with us, and all of our distinguished guests. Thank you very much. We will give a short break right now, 3-4 minutes break. Then we will have the keynote remarks of Her Excellency Emine Erdoğan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.